People think betrayal always starts with a shocking discovery, but sometimes it begins with a single sentence spoken out loud, in front of everyone, where you are expected to smile and swallow it. Asterisk, my story didn't start in secret texts or late-night confessions. It started at a celebration meant to honor my wife's success, where I realized I was the only one who didn't understand the joke. I'm sharing this because many of you have felt that quiet shift, that moment when love starts feeling like a performance. This is a confession, not to shame anyone, but to remind you that truth always finds a way to surface. And when it does, you get to decide whether you disappear with a lie or stand tall with the truth. Asterisk, I never liked spotlight events, but I showed up for my wife Leela's promotion party because 12 years of marriage deserved that much, and because I still believed in us at that point, even if something had felt off for months. The restaurant was loud and polished, filled with co-workers who spoke in corporate laughter and clinked crystal glasses like success had a sound. I stood beside Lila as people congratulated her, hugged her, praised her dedication, and each time she smiled, I felt like I was standing next to a stranger, wearing my wife's face. Someone said, "You must be so proud." And I said, asterisk, I am, because that's what supportive spouses say. Leela squeezed my hand briefly, then let go, drifting toward her boss. Martin, like gravity, had changed directions. I noticed it but told myself I was being insecure. When Martin tapped his glass with a fork, the room quieted, and I felt my shoulders tense without knowing why. He smiled too wide and said, Lila succeeded despite her husband being, well, a distraction. People laughed softly, unsure if they should. I froze. Someone whispered awkward, and someone else said, he's joking. I looked at Lila, waiting for her to correct him, to say, my wife has always supported me. Asterisk, she didn't. She stared at her shoes like they'd suddenly offended her. My face burned. I laughed weakly because I didn't know what else to do. After the speech, I pulled her aside and said, why didn't you say anything? She replied, you're overthinking it. I said, he called me a distraction. She said, Martin has a weird sense of humor. I said, it hurt. She sighed and said, can we not do this tonight? On the drive home, the silence felt heavier than any argument. I asked, is there something I should know? She said, asterisk, no. I said, you seem distant lately. She said, work is stressful. I said, do you still love me? She paused and said, of course. That pause stayed with me. That night, lying next to her while she scrolled on her phone, turned away from me, I replayed every late night, every canceled weekend, every business trip that didn't make sense. I remembered how Martin had looked at her during the speech, like they shared a private victory. Asterisk, I remembered the way her hand shook when she picked up her purse. I stared at the ceiling and thought, that comment wasn't a joke. It was a signal. And somehow, I had been the only one in that room who didn't understand what was really being celebrated. The next morning, I didn't accuse her, because something inside me said truth comes faster when you stop chasing it. I stayed quiet and watched, noticing details I used to ignore. Asterisk, Leela used to leave her phone face down without thinking. Now it never left her sight. When she showered, her phone came with her, and when she forgot it on the counter, she rushed back like she'd left something alive. One afternoon, I said, I'm ordering groceries, asterisk, and she said, use your phone, too quickly. I smiled and said, mine's dead, and picked up her tablet. Her work email was still open. I wasn't snooping, I told myself, until a subject line burned into my eyes. Last night was worth the risk. Asterisk, my chest tightened. I opened it, then another, months of messages between Lila and Martin, carefully worded but unmistakable. He wrote, you deserve this promotion. She replied, asterisk, I couldn't have done it without you. He joked, your wife is lucky, you're predictable. She answered, that's why this works. My hands shook as I took screenshots, tears blurring the screen. I scrolled through calendar invites, hotel confirmations, business trips that matched dates she'd kissed me goodbye. That evening, I waited until dinner was over and said, we need to talk. She said, can it wait? I said, no. Asterisk, I placed my phone on the table and said, explain this. Her face drained of color. She whispered, how much did you see? I said, enough. She cried, said, it was a mistake. She said, it didn't mean anything. She said, it's over. I asked, how long? She said, it doesn't matter. I said, it matters to me. She said, please don't tell anyone. I asked, are you sorry you did it, or sorry I found out? She looked away. Then she said, you'll ruin my career. That sentence landed harder than the affair itself. Asterisk, I realized she was more afraid of losing her title than losing me. She reached for my hand and said, "We can fix this." I nodded and said, "I need time," while inside, something hardened. Asterisk, that night, I lay awake, thinking not about revenge, but about dignity. I decided then that whatever I did next wouldn't be loud, emotional, or messy. It would be smart, and it would be honest. For weeks, I played the role she wanted me to play. The forgiving wife who cooked dinners, asked about meetings, and smiled at the right moments. Inside, I was planning. I called a lawyer and said, "I need to know my options." And she said, "Start documenting everything." I already had. I learned about marital assets, workplace policies, and how truth moves slower but stronger than lies. Then I sent an anonymous email to the company's ethics hotline, attaching evidence and highlighting timelines. The twist came when my lawyer said, "Martin has prior complaints." That changed everything. I RSVP'd yes to the leadership retreat. Leela asked, "Are you sure?" I said, "I want to support you." At the retreat, the HR director announced a review due to a credible complaint. I watched Martin's smile fade. Lila whispered, "Did you do this?" I said, "I told you I needed time." Later, Martin cornered me and said, "What do you want?" I said, "The truth." That night, Lila confessed more than I expected, admitting the promotion was promised early. As she slept, I packed my bag and left the evidence folder behind. I didn't feel guilty, I felt free. Asterisk, the fallout was quiet but final. Martin was placed on leave, then removed. Lila's promotion was suspended. I filed for divorce calmly. She called and said, "I never meant to hurt you." I said, "But you did." Months later, I rebuilt my life, slowly and honestly. When I heard she transferred departments, I felt no joy, only closure. That comment at the party had been a warning. I learned that respect isn't optional, and love doesn't require silence. Karma didn't arrive with drama, it arrived with truth, and I walked forward without guilt. Asterisk, if this story resonated with you, it's because betrayal rarely looks the way we expect. Sometimes it wears a smile and raises a glass in public. I didn't share this for sympathy, but for strength. You are allowed to pause, to observe, and to choose yourself when something feels wrong. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers and waits. Thank you for listening, for holding space for stories like mine, and for reminding each other that honesty is always worth the cost. Until next time, take care of your heart.